Hello everyone. I'm glad to see you on my channel. The story I'm going to tell you today is pure. It is true that all the bad things that happen in life happen for a reason. It is said that we can appreciate the good things, the things when they happen to us. I hope you enjoy this story. I wish you a pleasant viewing experience.
Besides her grandmother, Leslie has a mom and a stepdad. There is a father, of course, but that word is not heard in their house. Her father lived somewhere in the north, where he went to work and where he stayed. Leslie was 4 years old then, and for a while the memory of her father lived in her in the reindeer hat, the thick, stiff fur of it, and the bucket of blueberries that came by way of a favor. As sweet as currants, Leslie marveled. Then the memory melted away, as if the spring waters had carried it away with the winter. And then Mom went to town. She also said she was going to earn money, though Grandma was angry that doctors are needed everywhere. And it was still unknown who would be sent and whether they would send someone to take my mom's place. Mom got married in the city, and at first she kept asking her daughter to come to her place. Her stepfather would let her take Leslie, and she had a place to live. Leslie would go to the house to try it out, and she'd go to the spacious apartment on the 11th floor. She was afraid to go to the windows high up. Even to look down would make her dizzy. On the balcony, Leslie could not be pulled out by any means, and it embarrassed her that both below and above her head lived other people. They have closets and couches and all that stuff. Maybe there's a piano above where she's sitting upstairs now, on the 12th floor. Leslie shivered. It was only in the evenings, when the light of the desk lamp flooded the room, when she couldn't see the city outside the window. Leslie fell asleep early, but her sleep was shallow, uneasy. In the next room, her mother and stepfather had the television running late at night, and there was the sound of fresh, cheerful voices or gunshots or music, instead of the deep silence, broken only occasionally by the barking of dogs, as in their village here in the city. Trolley buses rumbled outside the window. Her mother hoped that Leslie would be struck by the huge shopping center next to the house, as a girl should be. Those glass doors that swung open by themselves as you approached them. The gleaming floors that are continuously being cleaned by some machine driven by a man right down the halls. A waterfall of merchandise behind every display case. Her mother immediately bought Leslie a denim sundress and a pink t-shirt and told her not to take off the clothes after trying them on, but to walk like that. They went up the escalator to the highest floor. In this whirlpool, Leslie couldn't even count how many were 4, 5. And up here there was a skating rink, slot machines, a huge King Kong with rubber paws, and a myriad of snack bars. Leslie ate pizza for the first time in her life. Her mother taught her to drink a strawberry milkshake through a straw, and she'd ask her with triumphant glee, "How was it?" Leslie would cringe. This world was sucking her in like a swamp. She had to become something else to enjoy the city, to appreciate it. In the meantime, she was uncomfortable and afraid of the rebirth that would take place in her, and she did not want it. She counted the days left until she returned to her grandmother and found more and more arguments in conversation with her mother to praise her life in the village. What a school they had, what a class, and the lilacs that she and Grandma planted in Leslie's front garden. The lilacs bloomed for the first time this year, and Billy's father will teach all the kids who want to play guitar in the fall. And finally, the last invincible argument, with eyes downcast and quiet voice. "I feel sorry for Grandma. She'll be all alone if I don't come." In the last days of summer, instead of coming to get nastiest things, her mother brought Leslie back with all the presents she had bought. "Well then, I'll be coming over. Often, Mother said. A year later, Harry was born, and he became ill at once, so that it was impossible to live with him in the village. He would get a runny nose here, or his tummy would get upset. And his mother became almost like his father. A voice in the telephone receiver, a remittance slip in the mailbox. A rare holiday whirlwind, an avalanche of surprises when all the same will come on another day. Here is the cell phone, a new down jacket, a gold chain girl. Well, you here do not miss. Leslie only the first hours, when her mother would come, tried not to leave her consciousness that it was her mother, waiting for news, looking at presents. And then it became awkward, when you realize you can't say anything back. Well, you'll show notebooks with grades. And then what? Leslie lowered her eyes again. "No, I don't miss you. No, no one's hurting me. No, Harvey won't teach me how to smoke. He doesn't smoke yet. I don't climb high in the trees. I remember I can only run barefoot on a hot day." And as if the same feet that had been running barefoot until frost began to itch, Leslie would quickly and imperceptibly disappear. She would go to Harvey's place, and they would sit in the attic, looking out from there, like lookouts from a ship. My stepfather's car would pull up, and the three of them, my grandmother, my mother, and my stepfather, would start loading vegetables into the trunk of the car. The crops here were always bountiful, and jars of jam and compote. Mother would look around, looking for Leslie to say goodbye, and Leslie would nimbly monkey down from the attic. She put her cheeks to her mother's hurried, dry lips. In the end, Leslie began to see these visits as a tribute. Her mother paid tribute with her visits to Leslie and her grandmother, and they gave her their part of the tribute with garden bounties. And again, they parted for a long time. Leslie comes home at an hour when many city kids are just pulling their heads off the pillow. In her hands, she holds a rolled-up burdock full of strawberries. Leslie has had a couple of baths, and now it's time to sit down at the table and eat breakfast. But Grandma is distracted today. She puts Leslie's porridge and does not even know that the girl sprinkled it too generously with sugar. Grandma pours only a cup of black coffee for herself, but she does not hurry to drink it. She holds her cheek with the palm of her hand and stares out the window. It's starting to rain, and Mist makes a little noise on the other side of the door, suggesting that it's not a bad idea to let him in. He is very fond of coziness, and more than once fell asleep on rainy days, curled up next to the young mistress in the chair. Grandmother and Foggy didn't hear. Leslie got up, walked across the veranda, and opened the door to the rainy garden, shaking and trembling with every leaf. "What are you?" she asked her grandmother. "Do you have a headache?" Grandmother often has a headache, and Leslie knows that those long green pills that look like candy canes are a quick remedy. Maybe she's out of pills. Then she'll run out and get some. So what if it's raining? "My girl, do you know what optimization is?" Grandma asked. If grandmother began to speak long, incomprehensible words, it is a sure sign that she is immersed in her thoughts, talking not so much to Leslie as to herself. "The head mistress called me this morning," Grandma said, now definitely for Leslie, and told me to come for an important conversation. Leslie squirmed involuntarily. She was going into second grade. She'd gotten good and excellent grades, but adults could always find something to pick on if they wanted to. Harvey, maybe he did something wrong. Principal Lucy knows he's always hanging around their house. Maybe she wants Grandma to influence Harvey for the better. Leslie thought about what Harvey might have done and couldn't think of anything. Usually they always did stuff together. "Our school will no longer exist," Grandma said thoughtfully, as if to herself. "It will be wholesale. It's not profitable for the state to maintain a school when there are 4 or 5 children in classes. They're going to bus you all around." Leslie opened her mouth. "No school?" She jumped up to run to Harvey with the news. "Wait a minute," Grandma held her by the sleeve. "I'm not going to have a job either." Grandma remembered Lucy, young and cheerful, how she had tried to soften the blow with a smile and a lot of words, in which the evil news was drowning and spreading. She knew that her grandmother had come to this school when it was still new, beautiful. Together with the children, she washed the windows from the whitewash stains. Together with them, she planted the school garden, which now drowns in lilacs every spring, and in August, it smells sweetly of apples and pears. Grandmother and her students came up with an idea to draw illustrations for their favorite books, and these pictures multiplied every year, spilled out of the classroom onto the walls of the corridor, and reached the teacher's room in a wave. Archie, a boy with golden hands, chiseled the legs of his grandmother's teacher's desk, like in the 19th century. Among grandmother's students every year there were winners of district and regional Olympiads, and someone was sure to enter the philological faculty, and someone was sure to come to grandmother on August 15, her birthday. "You understand, Barbara," the principal said. "That girl, the school's literary critic, can't be fired. She just got out of maternity leave, a small child, a family on her salary. Maybe there's some hours for you. You'll be traveling with the boys." Lucy paused. "Unless you're tempted by an offer like this, to Pompeii." Grandmother looked puzzled. If their village was getting by, Pompeii was disappearing. Like a village disappearing. A few old men, who had no one to take them away, spent the winters there. But in spring the dacha owners came, renewing their mansions, the local rubliaka. What to do there in Pompeii? Some rich lazy bum's parents decided to hire a tutor for the summer. "But it has nothing to do with children," Lucy refuted the unspoken out loud. "One of my acquaintances will now live there permanently. Younger brother. He's a sick man. Some kind of trauma, I think. In general, then a wheelchair, then crutches, as it is so. Today worse, tomorrow better. Well, and there and have to help, cook, wash. I'm sorry, they're looking for a housekeeper? Barbara, darling, it'll be twice the salary you had here. More than I'm making now. There was a woman who used to look after the house when it was empty, but her daughter's had a baby, and she's leaving to take care of her grandson. She says that owner's good. I told my children about serfs. Now I'm going to be the master myself. And what makes you think I make a good housekeeper? What's there to do with today's technology? The headmistress didn't back down. It's not like in the old days. We used to do laundry by the river. They have one machine washing dishes, another doing laundry, another baking bread. Well, it's summer now. You don't have much to do. You'll earn money. And in the fall? What about in the fall? House Leslie? Don't rush ahead of the locomotive. You'll go there with Leslie. I'm told you'll have your own place there. You'll be your own bosses. What does the baby see? He sees nothing but the 3 yards here. And there's a river nature. And if nothing changes by the fall, you'll lead this man. We'll find you a place at the school as an hourly teacher. All right, I'll think about it, Grandma said dryly. And now they were thinking with Leslie. Such was the democracy of their little family. There was a thin iron pipe between the house and the lime tree. There was a swing hanging from it. All stories are made up better on the swing. All conversation is easy when you're flying upward, downward, and your heart stinks. If you swing high, your back flies right into the branches of the apple tree. Apple blossoms. My mom used to bring this apple blossom soap. Round, beautiful, fragrant. They only have bars of soap here in the store, with sharp edges and a pungent perfume smell. And then, instead of flowers, huge apples of the trifling variety ripen. You take each one as a gift. Grandma and Leslie wrap them in newspapers and put them on the shelves in the closet, where Christmas toys are stored in boxes. In the fall, she takes a couple to school for herself and Coca. One apple like that gives you enough to eat for a whole day. And if you fly on a swing forward, you'll fly into the sky. Feet soar to the clouds. The clouds are huge, like castles, like in the cartoon Jack in Wonderland. And it's not scary to fly up to them from here in your backyard. But on the Ferris wheel, when Leslie went on rides in town, her mom said, "Be quiet, be quiet." Leslie just clung to the seat. Not her own will. Someone else's power lifted her up, make her equal to the sky. And just as easily could have thrown her down. But today Leslie sways, tucking the edges of her dress so that her panties do not sparkle, and Harvey sits and chews on the stem, not the edge of it, which is juicy and soft. They have long ago tasted every leaf, every blade of grass, like foals. Harvey chews on the withered top of the stalk, thinks. Every departure is a disappearance into other worlds. Will you come back? No? School will be different in the fall, Harvey says. He's not sure when he's going to hear back. Yeah, it's 1,000 years away, Leslie says. Well, do you want me to ask your grandmother to let you live with us while she's there? Harvey offers. Mommy will be happy. Well, what's the point of wasting your summer? Grandma's gonna be the babysitter, and you? Are you gonna sit behind a fence all summer? Leslie turns to him, her eyebrows pulled together, her lips compressed into a string. He's silent for a moment, and then he speaks firmly. No, I can't explain it to you, but it's like something's calling me. Someone's calling me. I'm going. I've got to go, you know. Well, and if something happens, if it gets really bad, No, I won't run away. I'll call you. And why called you? Ask Harvey, hoping that Leslie will start to tell one of his stories, which are more interesting than any fairy tales. Leslie was silent. Dawn was gradually diluting the night with the white milk of fog. The window in Leslie's room was open as usual, and it seemed to the girl in a half-sleep, in the oscillation between dream and reality, that her bed might rise and float out of the window, and make its way through the mist like a ship of the sea or of heaven. Easy to reach were thought of the moon, which bowed close by like a balloon, and the stars silvery and tinkling like ice. Leslie visualized the seasons like a clock. Somewhere out there, in the cosmic cold height, where the clock called midnight, winter lurked. The hand would descend, and by 4 o'clock it would be warm spring. And June was red-hot sand under the feet of 6, and warmed the nearest 7 and 8. And then it began to dusk, and by the fall 10 the sun went behind the horizon, and by the heavy twilight of 11 the snow began to fly from the sky. And also time was parallel, that is, the past did not disappear, and the future was not gradually woven out of oblivion. Somewhere, parallel to the present, there was also little Leslie, clutching the old cat with her chubby, almost infantile hands. Leslie learning to drink from a cup. Leslie jumping with happiness at the Christmas tree that was put up last year. And there lived in the universe both Leslie the bride and Leslie the old lady. From time to time they echoed their thoughts, resurrected memories as vivid as pictures in a stereo ball, or had dreams that came true. Right now Leslie saw a girl. A light white dress with ruffles covered her knees. On her head was a big hat, also white in color. On her legs were snow white stockings. And one foot was taken out of a white slipper. The girl is leaning on the toe so that the stocking does not get dirty. The girl's hair is golden red, descending in long locks almost to the waist, and her eyes are gray blue. She is not beautiful, but looking at her pretty face, you want to laugh and talk to her. "Quiet," says the girl. "Can you be quiet?" She pulls back the thick curtain from nowhere and looks out, looking for someone. "I'm hiding from the doctor," she explains. "Leslie," came another voice, "a man's, and we can see you." The girl sighed and immediately looked at Leslie with a smile, as if inviting her into the game, stepped behind the curtain, and she was gone. Leslie woke up finally and sat up, wrapping her arms around her shoulders. She had the distinct feeling of a new acquaintance, a feeling that belonged only to her. "I want this girl to be known only to me." And at the same time, as her grandmother used to say, "You have to sleep with the news for a night." The night passed and Leslie realized, they're leaving. Probably not for good, but for the whole summer. And summer, when it's just begun, is almost a lifetime. "Will we take Misty?" Leslie asked. Fogg tilted his head to one side or the other. Listened, his eyes were laughing. He didn't understand anything. Only his name, and he felt love. Ram aside and affectionately. "Well, where will we take him to strangers?" Leslie, "What if they don't like dogs?" Harvey played with Fabi without raising his head. They've learned that Dobby only has to give him a sign with his hand, and he'll lie down and start rhythmically lifting one leg. He's either doing exercises or he'll Hitler, as Grandma grinned. "I'll take him till the fall. And then you'll come anyway," Harvey said. "Why are your eyes so wet?" "I'll be there in 3 hours, or I'll hitch a ride." And indeed they went on walking. To the spring. You have to go there on a hot day because you walk, and there's no end to it. The village of Adelanto is passing by, barely visible from behind the bread. The road narrows to a wide path. And there it turns into a path only one by one, and you can pass through. The spring breaks out of the stone captivity, like a naughty boy who escaped from his babysitters, and immediately hides in the grass to avoid being caught. He hastily tells, jumping from pebble to pebble, about the life of the underworld, and he fades away into the grass. It's good to drink from a spring when you lie on your stomach, and not only drink, but the water covers your face. It's funny, and the sun trembles on your wet eyelashes with all shades of rainbow. And the silence around is so faint. No, birds are singing and trees are splashing, weaving their leaves into the sky blue, but it is impossible to hear a man here. There is no murmur of a car, no voices, no music, no one. And since there are no people, everything else is possible. "Harvey," said Leslie, "take me in with the fog." Only she said it without a sound, with just her lips. There were 2 villages, Big Pompeii and Pompeii. The big one survived on its own. There had once been a collective farm, of which there was now a semblance of a farm. Cows lived there in semi-darkness and musty, unclean air. There was a museum of folk life, a 2-story hut, where you could find everything from a spinning wheel to a garish portrait of the bandit Stenka Rezin, who once visited these parts. And the pride of the village were the holy springs. Once 2 unremarkable almost springs formed a lake, in which ducks and domestic and wild gray necks bathed with pleasure. But then someone there recovered from something by drinking water directly from the spring. Another saw the bent figure of a praying man, and the springs were cleaned, enclosed in a tiled area. A bathing area was made, flowers were planted. The water was examined. One of them contained a lot of iron, the other silver. And those who were suffering to drink, wash themselves, take water with them. Now, according to rumors, the building optimized school bought a tourist company and was preparing to make a hotel here. Pompeii was very different. Although the nature here was much more beautiful, and the village was close to a large river, but Pompeii survived only at the expense of dacha owners. In the winter days, New Year holidays excluded, There were a dozen old women here, whose houses, like the houses of those who lived hundreds of years ago, were warmed by stoves. On other days, the snow covered all the roads, and the houses stood as islands surrounded by a pristine snow-white sea. The blizzard subsided, the old women gathered courage and strength to visit each other, and now necklaces of footprints, prints of felt boots and beaks, stretched from hut to hut. In spring, the island of Pompeii, cut off from the whole world, melted by melt water, the road dried up, and the store opened. It was a kind of local attraction, two-story, resembling a landing stage with iron ladders, round windows with portholes, and proximity to the water. The store stood almost on the shore. Everything from pantyhose to ice cream was sold inside. There was a tennis table and a big TV hanging there. The store was everything. They traded, played, watched movies, met, fell in love, and said goodbye before the big barn lock was hung on the door again in October. Dachniks who came to the village to spend vacations or weekends built themselves houses, many bigger and more luxurious than a storeship. But almost all the mansions were surrounded by blind fences and installed on them CCTV cameras, unblinking, unmindful, incorruptible eyes, immediately tracking the stranger. And the fun of the owners with loud music, clouds of thick kebab smoke, splashing water in the pools, laughter and squeals, all this went behind the fences you can hear, smell, but not see. Old women saw dacha owners only when they went to the store. No one kept cows here for a long time, and city children turned their noses away from goat's milk. For some of them it was too fat for them, and others were allergic to it. The dacha dwellers used the river in full. They raced on motorboats, shouted when the bow of the boat dissected the water, showering them with splashes. They tried to hunt for pike perch in wetsuits and with a spear. But in the murky water, the prey was scarce. But children rarely showed themselves on the streets, and certainly did not play in front of old women. Maybe they didn't leave their houses at all, having plunged headfirst into unreal computer worlds. One of the new houses was especially dressed up. The lawn in front of the fence was green, and the bases of 3 blue spruce trees were buried in it like a carpet, and gnome sculptures looked out from behind the trees. The house belonged to, well, not exactly the owner of factories, cars, and steamships, but still Harry had a well-known network of stores in the region. He and his young wife didn't come here often, but he kept Selina, a woman in her 50s, who looked after the house, and a local man, a young pensioner, Frederick, who looked after the garden. Now Selina was giving up the place, grudgingly, but hoping to come back here. She had enjoyed living almost all year round as a hostess in a large and beautiful house, but now she had to be a nurse for a while with her newborn grandson. Her daughter was calling desperately, or she was in danger of losing her job. And Harry, as luck would have it, was thinking of bringing his brother here, the first Selina had ever heard of. And that brother needed almost a caregiver for him, since he could do little for himself. Selina grudgingly thought of the shift they had found for her. God willing, in the few months that Selina would have to spend in the city, the woman would get bored, exhausted from nursing, and leave. And so, on Saturday morning, the owner's black Jeep pulled up in front of the house. Selina looked out the window and ran down the stairs to open the gate. Selina was wearing an apron. She had been cooking for the guests since morning. First out of the car was Harry's young wife, Kathy. Long ago, 2 years ago, she was a stripper and her name was Malvina. Now that she was a respectable lady, she no longer dyed her hair a bluish lilac color and arranged it in a high hairdo. But her wide-set eyes kept the same haughty, mocking expression as when she danced at the pole and said, "There is me and there is all of you." The owner of the house, short, sturdy, in some ways even handsome, thick dark hair with blue eyes, stepped on the ground, stood for a few seconds, breathing in the air, looking around. Then he sighed regretfully. If it were up to him, they would have traveled here more often. He loved fishing, and he loved grilling fish over a fire and the simple pleasures of life, like a big mug of beer under a starry sky. But Katie was bored here. Harry pulled a folding wheelchair out of the car and was about to unfold it when the back door opened, revealing a hand with a cane. "Don't, I'll do it myself." A guy of about 35 got to his feet with an agonizing effort. It was evident that the disease had struck him suddenly and severely. His body was still so full of strength, his arms so tanned, that it took all his strength and a bitten lip to keep him on his feet, including the cane. His blonde hair was cut short, almost curly, and his very light eyes, which were used to laughing, now looked cautiously out from under his swollen eyelids. I'm waiting for you, Selena said. I've prepared a room on the first floor. If you don't like it, you can tell me. I thought there were stairs to the second floor. Harry stopped the housekeeper with a wave of his hand. Baby, aren't you seasick? The young woman shook her head negatively, adjusted the strap of her small purse on her shoulder, and walked into the house first. She didn't greet Selena with a greeting. She looked at her hurriedly, as a dog that doesn't know whether to be kicked or petted. I've got everything ready right here. Selena opened the two halves of the door. The room was large, quiet, and somewhat dark with windows overlooking the shady garden. The main character in the room was the bed, a huge bed that could fit 3 or 4 people. Come in, lie down, Selena said. Why don't I bring you some cold compote to drink on the way? Katie only caught a glimpse and went into her bedroom to have a look. She needed to see that no one was using her nest without her or lying under the canopy on her luxurious gold silk bedspread with embroidered peacocks. The bedroom stood untouched, almost uninhabited, even the air stale. Selena knew her place. Katie opened the window, then went to the mirror. She didn't look at herself haughtily. She looked at herself questioningly. She fixed her lush hair. Spreading her arms, she fell onto the wide bed, knowing that no matter how much Harry tried to please her and leave early, he would still be talking to his brother, and it would have to be a half hour or so. The men were left alone. Harry crushed his chin with his hand, hesitating to start the conversation. Carlos looked around. I wish I had some water. Selena appeared out of the ground with the promised cold compote. Thank you. Carlos nodded to Selena, unaccustomed to gratitude, and began to take the pills out of the purse on his belt and shake them into his palm. When a small, colorful mound of them was full, he popped them into his mouth in one motion and took a drink of compote. In about a quarter of an hour, the pain would begin to recede with a leisurely ebb, giving freedom to what was now hiding behind it thoughts, feelings. But Harry wasn't waiting now. So are you happy here? He asked, looking around. His brother looked up, squinting, nodding in a way that made the older man embarrassed. But you wanted to come here. You could have stayed in the hospital. We would have hired a doctor. Harry, remember, they found a woman to replace me, Selena said hurriedly, before she was kicked out for good. She was in a hurry to make it clear. She's a nice woman, a teacher. Only she's coming with her granddaughter. You won't mind, will you? They'll live where you are now, in the guest house. Completely separate. There's plenty of room. Just tell her not to let the baby in here. Carlos can sleep and rest without the baby bothering him. And don't let the grandmother or granddaughter bring visitors. Peace and quiet. Peace and quiet. Selena nodded, then quietly closed the door. So, Harry returned to the interrupted conversation. You wanted it. Although it could have been a hospital and then a sanitarium. There you'd have the same opportunities for recovery. Doctors, procedures, exercise equipment, massages. And here. Carlos looked at him with the same tired and frowning look. Well, how can I explain to you? Poor guy, in his thoughts he always called Valorca, poor guy for some reason, that the best doctors and grandmothers told him about that recovery. And it was better to tune in, mentally tune in now, that you would never walk again, only through pain. It is necessary to try, alone with himself, to feel his body, which thousands of times helped him out, and which he himself drove into trouble. By animal feeling it will obey. No? And if not, then accept it finally, and reorganize all his thoughts, words, smile, future, in a word, everything. And come back to people not as a whiner that everyone wants to shake off his shoulder, but a man who knows why he came back. You've been very generous with your life so far, Harry said, and no one stopped you. The army is the army. Dad should have just hinted to the right people. Come back alive, put a candle to God, and get on with your life. No. It's buddies, sorry, some gangsters. All these fights under the guise of martial arts. It's gone again. Now you take a backpack and go wander the world. Where you sleep, who gives you a ride doesn't matter. The carelessness of an infant or, pardon me, a fool. I think your guardian angel's got his wings stuck on you. You're coming back from where? Correct me if I'm wrong, Nepal Bright. And you're off to start work in the movies. Again at someone else's dubious invitation. It's here too. And then you jump off a cliff into the water and hello. If they hadn't pulled you out. You're a phenomenon, Carlos. The one who calls on Wednesdays and I wash my hands of you. You can live here as long as you want. We only come by a couple times a summer anyway. What? Carlos had an unfriendly sneer in his voice. Where am I gonna go from 4 walls? Set the bed on fire. Blow up the toilet? Pollute Empress Leska's bedroom? Harry sighed, stood up, started looking through his cell phone's address book. I've got your new number. You got mine too. If you run out of meds or need anything, call me. If you're just bored here. Carlos didn't explain that he hadn't been able to be alone for a long time. He didn't see the stately Kathy emerge from the gate. He only heard her voice, commanding him to do something. And that voice, if he were his brother, would have made him want to kill himself. They arrived in the evening. Leslie clutched the cat tightly to her chest and followed her grandmother and Selena with an inconspicuous tail. Merzik's gaze had lost its usual arrogance and was dazed. Given the will, he would probably wound under any bush, not thinking about the consequences, but Leslie clung to him with both hands. Now I'll show you the house. There's a summer kitchen on the first floor, and on the second floor you'll live, Selena said, now without the real owners, walking toward the red brick house. There were pots of petunias on the windowsills. Leslie's head whirled fearfully as she looked around at how tidy everything was. The bright green lawn, neatly trimmed, seemed like a fluffy emerald carpet from which roses from creamy white to dark red, almost black, rose proudly. The huge mansion next to their house ended in a glass gallery. There were palm trees in tubs, some unknown flowers that looked like butterflies perched on dry bare stems, and most importantly, there was a fountain running. Leslie's mouth dropped open, and she immediately tripped over the threshold of their cabin. Selena led them straight to the second floor. The stairs were narrow and the dark wood steps were high. You had to be very careful and hold on to the railing or you'd roll down headfirst. There was one room upstairs that was spacious. Leslie let go of the cat, who ran straight to the first shelter under the bed, and went to the window. It looked out onto the garden, the tops of apple trees swaying nearby. Leslie thought it would be like living in a castle tower, and there was always a feeling to open the window, run through the treetops like grass, and then take off in flight to the clouds. But Selena hurried them to continue the tour. And this is the winter garden. She opened the doors to the glass gallery. And as her own, slightly lowering her voice, she added, if it were up to me, I would make a greenhouse here. Can you imagine how many tomatoes and cucumbers you could grow? No, they're just kind of relaxing here, even though they come here 3 times a year. There were vines with unknown names stretching to the high ceiling. Orchids, which in their homeland are considered almost a weed, were queens here. Mossy palms crowded in the corners. In the center of the fountain stood the figure of a girl. Water flowed from her palms, folded boat. Come on, I'll show you the garden, Selena said, feeling proud of the garden. Harry bought the land, had the dump removed, the whole place torn down. But the land was still sloping, you see, so the garden had to be terraced. Would you introduce me to? Grandma hesitated for a moment, remembering the name. Not the master, really, Carlos? Oh, yes, he's probably asleep. Together they went back to the master's house, and Selena opened one of the doors. Then Leslie noticed that Merzik was afraid to sit alone, and found her running after her. She picked him up again. It was a small room, sparsely furnished, resembling a hospital room. Definitely asleep. Well, let's go on. I'll show you how to heat it if it gets cold. The women left, and Leslie opened the door again, entered quietly, and sat down on a chair by the bedside. The man interested her immensely. He was lying on his back, a muscular arm thrown behind his head. He had been lying so still for hours because he had found a position that hurt less. But Leslie didn't know that. She saw, but could not yet express, that there was something boyish in his face. Only this boy was grown up and tired. The cat was tired. How long could he sit on his hands? He mewed almost silently and began to wriggle out of Leslie's embrace, insisting that he be lowered to the floor. The man opened his eyes. They, too, were tired and swollen, as if he had a rough dream and hadn't rested at all. The man looked up at Leslie. Hi, he said gruffly. Aye, she said, adjusting the cat in her hands. Did you really say you couldn't take mist? What? He even turned his head toward her, listening. He squinted. What mist? What are you talking about? My mist. He doesn't bark much, but he can jump out the window, wait for me at the store, stand on his hind legs as long as you want, and he does the healed Hitler thing. How's that? He asked me again. Well, like this paw, Leslie showed, forward it and raises it up. And he crouches down funny. Why did you leave such a dog? He still didn't understand. Wait, who are you? He raised himself up on his elbow. She liked that he was looking at her seriously, But how could he not know who she was? She gave an amused twitch of her mouth as if he'd shifted to the side and immediately returned to his original position. "Grandma and I came to take care of you," she explained, "and Grandma said you might not like dogs. So two men took Harvey, but only until the fall, then I'll take him back." He looked at her, a ruddy, tanned girl with a face that reminded him of a spring flower. Every age has its time. She was the touching flower that one notices and admires with the first warmth. "Bring your beast," he said, "or rather tell Harvey to bring it in right away, or he'll heal it, he won't give it back." She brightened up and trustingly shook the cat in her arms. "And this is Merzik," Grandma said. "You can take him because he will not leave our room. Merzik catches mice. If I see one that's still alive, I take it away. It's pathetic, it squeaks. It's good for you to take him too. He lies down around your head like a hat and starts singing songs. And then you fall asleep at once." He reached out his hand and stroked the cat. The cat looked haughty. "Why do you need such a big house?" Leslie asked. "Aren't you bored here? I haven't even seen it yet. What's wrong with your voice?" He cleared his throat. "I just got here before you. And you don't know what's interesting around here either." "All right, Leslie, calm down. I'll see everything and I'll tell you then. You're a little girl." He couldn't stand it. "Where are you going to go from the yard? Who's gonna let you go alone?" Leslie twitched her mouth funny again, now with a look of, "Oh, those grown-ups. What would I do at home?" She explained, "I mean, if I was at home, in my room. But I know everything. Harvey and I used to go to the spring to fetch water, and where agate stones can be collected on the shore, I know. Grandmother says they are called Volga agates, and where there's an ice cave and there's a birch tree. Everyone goes to the forest for opiates, but I can easily bring you a birch, and no one else knows where they grow, aha." And she felt even more that he was a boy, a little older than he was. He was squinting at her as if he was taking her for a ride, asking if you were lying. "And what was the ice cave? You're definitely making it up now." "What are you?" "I'm not imagining anything. It's so cold there in the summer, it's so cold." Leslie wanted to put her arm around her shoulders, but the cat got in the way. She finally got the cat down on the floor, and he trotted toward the door with his tail held high. "You can't get there in the snow, so I don't know what it's like in winter. But in summer there's frost on the walls and the floor. That summer when we had village day, it was so hot that dacha dwellers got sick. An ambulance even came to one girl, I saw it. She was lying there and they put ice on her. I said, 'Let's go to the ice cave.' And so many people followed me. My grandmother said, 'There's a mountain on top. There's a lot of stone. The sun can't reach it and it's cold.' People were sitting on the floor, enjoying themselves until the bus came for them in the evening. 'It's a deal,' he said. 'If you see anything interesting, you'll tell me about it. Just you be careful though. And not near the water.' 'Have you never been for a walk at all?' 'Not at all.' She asked almost pityingly. What would happen if he told this girl about Nepal from where he came back, and a week later he jumped into that damn lake, and about the Far East, and about Sakhalin, and about the fact that he would never go anywhere else? She gently, with two hands, took his hand in her small palms and shook her head. 'Do you know any fairy tales?' 'Leslie, Leslie.' A voice came into the room, and a woman, no, an old lady with glasses and high hair. 'You can't come in here. Go to your room.' 'Hello, Carlos.' 'Leslie.' 'Well, he's bored, Grandma.' Leslie said it in a long voice, like she was conveying boredom. 'Not him, Carlos. I explained to you. I'm sorry, for God's sake. She won't bother you anymore.' 'Why not?' He objected and tried to sit up. And we agreed about the dog. We need a dog.' 'Hear that, Grandma?' Leslie's happy voice came from outside the door. She was put to bed early as usual, but this time Leslie couldn't sleep. Her bed was separated from the rest of the room by a large closet, so she had her own corner. But there was no high window to jump out of. And when that green mist in, I'll have to explain that to him, or he'll break all his legs. The fence is like a palace with wrought iron gates, and its heavy iron bars go all the way to the ground. You can't get under them. And the fence is topped with sharp spikes. But behind their house, where there is a big garbage can, there is a green plastic sheet instead of one of the spans, and it can be easily pushed away. And someone must have taken advantage of it, because there's a path running away from the loophole into the woods." Leslie lifted herself up and looked at the sun, which was almost set. You have to sleep overnight in a new place, and then it becomes your own, Niv. You know which tree the sun sets behind, and in the morning the sky begins to lighten over which tree. And at dawn, everyone here greets you. Birds and grasshoppers sing to you as a good friend. Then Leslie thought of the man she had met today. Grandmother said that he was quite helpless, he should even be served a cup of tea. But Leslie couldn't help thinking that no one would dare to hurt her here, because there was this man. Natalie had been at sea for the last day. In the evening, a bus was to pick up the tourists who were staying at the hotel on Parkova and take them home. It was going to be a long journey with an overnight transfer. So in the afternoon, Natalie wanted to have a good rest, to walk around the favorite local places to say goodbye. But it didn't work out. She realized this in the early morning. The approaching heat had whitened the sky, and the air was still. Though the hotel room overlooked the forest, it was only at this hour that she could open the door to the balcony and enjoy the damp forest odors and birdsong. When the sun rose and the air began to warm as quickly as if an iron had been plugged in, Natalie closed the balcony door, turned on the air conditioner, poured herself a glass of cold apple juice, and stretched out on the sofa. For the first time in her life, she was going on vacation alone, but in the strict sense it couldn't be called a vacation. She had come to the sea to be alone with herself, to calm down, and to think how to live further, to make some kind of plan. It was a cheap tour, just right for her, because she was left with almost nothing. But that was nothing. The important thing was that they didn't give her Mickey. She wasn't naive enough to try to steal her son and keep him. Natalie was so tired that she fell asleep on the bus and didn't want to get off at stops, and when the elderly attendant Madi woke her up, she just shook her head and went back to sleep. She awoke on the morning of the second day's journey. It was overcast, and instead of yesterday's fields, the bus was surrounded by mountains. The emerald green of early summer, which had not yet burned out, glowed softly against the pre-thunderstorm sky. It was as if the earth was lighting up the sky, not the other way around. Natalie got her first good look at her traveling companion, a middle-aged man, not her now, but him asleep. In the 24 hours he'd been out and about, doing a crossword puzzle, rustling through a magazine, eating some cookies out of a bag, it was like she was seeing through a veil. And her whole life for the last few years had been through the same veil, if you could make sense of it. Last stop, Maddie announced. Breakfast, get cleaned up. We'll be there soon. Bear with us. The man woke up, shook his head like a dog shaking off water, took out his cigarettes. Natalie descended the steps of the bus carefully. She shook slightly. She jumped to the ground, put her hands behind her head, and stretched her whole body. She was not in pants, as almost all women were, but in a long balaclava dress. That way her thinness was less noticeable. Already it felt south. The air smelled different, but the sea odor could not be carried by the wind far away. Near a small cafe there were two lions on pedestals, reminding those who guarded the palace. Pine trees grew unusually fluffy, and the black metal fence around the cafe was braided with roses. The blossoms were huge and somehow serene. Aristocrats who knew only the mild southern climate, who wouldn't be disturbed by frost. Back in her native land, roses were smaller, and they didn't always survive the winter. Kaif sold pies, khachapuri, and akma at a triple price, as they always did on the road. Many tourists bought red wine in plastic cups, though Madi scolded and demanded to get to the place sober, and there as you like. When they got back on the bus, Madi shook her head. "We'd better get through the Serpentine before it rains," and began to remind us to remember to buckle up and to keep the paper bags in the seat pockets. Now the bus was on a mountain road, really serpentine, but the mountains were not terrible, low, but island-topped, densely overgrown with forest. They resembled green candy truffles. And behind them we could already see the sea, which on this day also seemed pale blue and shining like an aquamarine stone against the leaden sky. Following her host, a young man named John, Natalie furtively picked a few berries and put them in her mouth. It too was southern pure sweetness without a hint of acidity. Natalie was placed under the very roof, a small room with a balcony almost overlooking the forest. You can touch the trees. No view, no panorama, but no one could see her. On sunny days you could sunbathe naked. Natalie didn't even bother to unpack her bag. Her swimsuit was in the bag from the Fivaraka store upstairs. She put on the swimsuit, then hastily put on her hoodie and locked the room a few minutes after the maid had opened it for her. She had convinced herself that she would think of nothing this week. What was 1 week? To wander in this park, where the catalpas are already in bloom, and the white flowers that look like little orchids come down in a heavenly snowfall, where the carved gates are hidden under a carpet of scarlet roses. She passed the park askew and found herself suddenly by the river. The narrow, inconceivably turquoise-colored river instantly revived in her memory the Caucasus with its mineral waters. There was a narrow bridge across the river, which swayed with a creaking squeal with every step. Natalie walked carefully, holding onto the railing. Almost the entire village was on the other side. A mother and a little boy were walking toward her. He could not yet reach the railing, and he shrieked with fear every time the bridge swayed. The mother let in with a firm grip on his collar. The pain had to wait it out, and Natalie stood for a few seconds, repeating to herself only that it wasn't the first time. It wasn't the first time. But how many more times would there be? "Are you coming?" someone asked from behind. She was blocking the way. Natalie crossed the bridge. On the other side of the bridge were the market stalls, a spider's web spread out so that no vacationer could get past it. It smelled of smoked fish, roasted meat, herbs, coffee, and sea breeze. Hooked to stalls, weightless hats with big brims swayed in the wind. Brightly colored scarves were ready to burst into the sky. And as from a cornucopia of everything that is connected with the sea and can lure people who came to meet it. Inflatable circles and mattresses, flippers and masks, mugs with painted dolphins, boxes of shells of all sizes and shapes, and others with starfish pale gray or painted. They also made temporary tattoos, invited you to kebabs, offered to take pictures with exotics, and without waiting for your consent, rushed to hang a huge snake around your neck or put a parrot on your shoulder. This holiday of life was overwhelming, and not at once one could sense in the traders the bureaucratic vivacity of mass entertainers. "Look," someone said, "we're freezing here, and the girl is going for a swim." Natalie realized later that any weather that didn't scorch the earth seemed cold to the locals, and even more so when it was overcast and rainy. She stepped leisurely off the embankment onto the beach, onto the coarse gray pebbles. Not many people were here now. Natalie leisurely took off her hoodie, as if it had finally fallen off her slim figure. Just as slowly, she curled her blonde hair into a bun, secured it with an elastic band, and went into the sea directly without that token, "Oh, it's cold," without delay, to get used to the water. She entered and swam with the measured movements of the swimmer, who is not easily tired. Soon she was at one of the red buoys, and she knew that she would not be allowed to swim any farther than that. The lifeguards would call out and tell her to turn around. She rolled over onto her back and lay like that. The sea was carrying her, and the rain was touching her face with soft paws. She was lying between the sea and the rain, her body separating them. A girl in a blue bathing suit. She waited after all. Natalie looked up as if she had just woken up. She was being shouted at from the lifeguard tower. She turned back with a sigh. "Aye, yeah, girl, the guy on the tower tried to flirt with her when she came ashore, and we thought you had drowned." But Natalie walked on with her head down, unresponsive, and the voice went silent. Right off the beach, she went to buy a new SIM card for her phone so she could talk cheaper. Her friend Anna had really asked her to let her know from time to time. Natalie followed the embankment along the river, hoping it would lead her to the center of the village. The river near the sea was a rich blue color, but further away it turned shallow and became a clear, wide stream with reed-covered banks. Frogs croaked shamelessly and squeakily, and there were no other sounds but their croaking, and roosters sang like in the countryside. Natalie reached the next iron bridge and made a mistake. She did not cross it, but turned to the right. Here, she thought, the road was wider and the houses taller. But the road led to the outskirts where there were no sidewalks, but only the highway, and cars were rushing after each other. There was nowhere to turn. On one side were houses with vegetable gardens, on the other mountains and forest. But she went on, hoping that somehow she would get to the right place. The village was small. She admired the front gardens, lilies and roses, wandered along narrow paths past other people's gardens, crossed some bridges. Finally, she reached the high-rise buildings, and then the rain came. A wall, a waterfall, a drenching rain. Natalie gulped for air. The rain pounded the ground so hard that her feet became muddy, the raindrops kicking up dust. Her dress was soaked and clinging to her body, her long blonde hair now streaming down her face. It was cold, and she was tired. Finally, she found the bus station, and in it a rack of operators, bought a SIM card, and sent a new phone number to her friend Anna, the only one who would care about her. She went to a small market, bought local cheese with herbs, some flatbreads, cherries, and with all this loot went to the hotel. She walked down the street all wet, and the water dripped off her, and she felt good. But when she got to the room, she gladly changed into a warm, dry robe. Now she was not afraid of the rain. She opened the door to the small balcony, protected from the rain by the roof. There were glasses in the cupboard. Soon Natalie was sitting in the rocking chair, sipping tea, listening to the rain and looking at the village, at the mountains whose peaks were hidden in the fog. She thought. At first, she really wanted to think about what she should do next, how to get Mickey back to her, but then her thoughts began to take her back to the past. Did you want extraordinary people? She asked herself, did you get them? And she thought God had been kind to her. She remembered the miracle of her enrollment in journalism school. Grandpa was in favor. He read aloud to her when she was little. He admired her writing at school, believed in her talent, and everyone else discouraged it, including the girls in the admissions office. Well, where are you going? They told her confidentially. There are 30 people per place, their own city people, and you're a country girl. There, across the street from the College of Pedagogy, you'll get in, and here you'll only waste your time. And then it wasn't Natalie who said it. It was my grandfather, who once was not afraid to come from the village to the academy, and got in, and graduated with a red diploma. It's our right to try, he said, and confidently walked through the huge lobby of the university, which resembled a train station. Here you had to register, get a number, then wait for it to appear on the electronic board. And there were as many people as at the station, and everyone was still not their own. Applicants, the turnover. Only hoped to become students their own. And at the entrance to the university building stood the unforgettable bronze shurick, the symbol of the student body. It was said that for good luck, he needed a tap on the shoulder. Natalie didn't dare, just touched him timidly. And she passed the competition past. She found herself in the short list of 10 people accepted for budgetary places. She wrote her creative work about the history of her family, which shared with the 20th century all its tragedies. She wrote as if she was talking to herself, thinking, sincerely, as if she did not suppose that someone would read it all. When she saw her name on the acceptance list, Natalie gasped and covered her mouth with her palm. Only then did she realize that this was it. Life had changed dramatically. She had to leave home and move into a dormitory. The guys, doomed to the dormitory, tried to create a cozy place here in the state walls. Rugs on the walls, a door covered with sodding, and a bell, everything like in a house. But in the room, the kitchenette was separated by a cupboard with an illegal electric stove. Natalie started working early, writing reports for the city newspaper. She was welcome there. And if some beginners were condescendingly called legs, live dictaphones, meaning that they could only take the material and an experienced journalist would write for them, Natalie's materials were printed with her signature. And then she was sent to interview a visiting singer in a hotel room. To her shame, she knew almost nothing about this artist. Grandfather hated pop music, he recognized only the classics. He himself in his youth had a beautiful, almost operatic voice. But for the newspaper, it was a good luck to interview a star. One of the guards at the hotel was the brother of their editorial chauffeur, and he would take one of the journalists to the coveted room in the evening, when the artist would be home. Natalie caught herself still calling the star of the stage Barry the artist impersonally, but with a tinge of bitterness. And he had not come alone, but with his father. And when she knocked, there was only his father in the room. He opened the door in a t-shirt and sweatpants, and when he found out who had come and why, he hurriedly pulled on his jacket. He still has a concert, he said, but it's already over. He'll be here soon. Come on in. As it turned out later, Barry was fleeing from the female fans who had burst onto the stage, wanting a piece of his black silk cape as a souvenir. In the end, the cape was simply torn for souvenirs. The artist returned 2 hours later, by which time his father had persuaded Leslie to try some inconceivable cognac, which he took out of a box, gold from the painted metals. Bad cognac, we must get rid of it. The artist returned and seemed drunk too, but from fatigue. He looked at Natalie and said, "My God, how beautiful you are." Natalie had only read about it happening like that and didn't believe it, that it could happen at first sight. From the get-go, no doubts, no hesitation. I need you and no one else. Turns out men have that right to decide. He was handsome. He looked like a gypsy or Voland himself. At least, that's what you'd imagine Woland to look like. Thick hair, blue-black waves over his forehead, and eyes so black that the pupils were almost invisible. Leslie's tall at his shoulder. He attracts stares wherever he goes. "When are you going to write about me?" he asked him at the door, quietly, as if a secret had already been born between them. Her cheeks were flaming, and she tried not to look him in the eye. "Tomorrow, I guess." And the morning he came to the editorial office, making a sensation there. He sat in the culture department on a shabby chair, with his leg over his leg, shaking his wavy mane, reading Natalie's pages with attention. The girls crowded in the doorway, while the editor and the executive secretary watched from the corridor behind them. Beautifully, the artist said expressively, handing the sheets back to Natalie, "I'm satisfied." His gestures were regal. Natalie was reminded of the ballet Swan Lake and the Prince. The artist continued his visit, talking about his concerts, about the countries he had visited, and recalling amusing things. Questions came at him from all sides. And before the answers flashed smiles of the girls, ready to accept with delight everything that the artist says. And then he asked Natalie, as if there was no one else in the office but them, "I'll take you home?" The girls gasped. Natalie caught the editor's eye and the boss nodded, only they didn't go to Natalie's house. The artist asked her, already putting her in the car, "Where's a good restaurant?" Restaurants were something that Natalie had no connection with, and the chauffeur, who had driven the stars around the city many times before, began to give her advice. Since then, Natalie had amused the artist with her shyness combined with a sense of dignity. She was almost afraid of the menu, which was served to them by a waiter in white gloves, and the artist had to order. But then, when the table was set and the candles lit, she did not get carried away by the sumptuous dishes she had never tasted, but listened. She admired him, and at the same time, he noticed that she was more interested in the time in his life when he had not yet had fame. A boy from a southern town, hitting a ball against the wall and chanting pioneer songs. A student, returning to his dormitory on an icy streetcar, and she asked him, as her mother had once asked her, "Maybe it wasn't worth it, what your life is like now, to go such a hard way. Foreign cities, a life of starvation, obscurity, and trying to be liked by everyone might help with your career." 2 days later, when his tour was over, the artist took Natalie with him. He had recently separated from his wife, and that was really it, not bravado. He lived alone now, except for 3 servants, in a country mansion that seemed a real kingdom to Natalie. For the first time, they were almost always away, and Natalie always felt desperately sorry for the artist. It seemed to her that everyone wanted to snatch him for themselves, just as they had snatched bits of his silk robe on the stage. And in him so much kindness, she thought he is always kind, smiles at everyone, hugs, allows to be photographed together, does not forget to say compliments to fans. And how many times had she seen their cheeks turn crimson red, and the girls themselves so happy that Natalie wanted to say, "Do you know how he had such a headache yesterday that he couldn't find a place to sit for half a day? We tried all the medicines, nothing worked until he fell asleep. Do you know that before a concert he gets nervous? He can get upset to the point of tears if the coffee in his cup is warm instead of hot. And that he sometimes comes back in the middle of the night and I'm not allowed to ask why. Where from? He doesn't care about anything, much less me. He doesn't feel guilty that I waited for him. He just falls asleep." The girls in the newsroom found Natalie on social media and started asking about the artist, how they live and what countries they travel to. And they didn't. Natalie was expecting a child, and at the end of that year, by Catholic Christmas, the artist flew to Europe alone. Natalie stayed in their mansion as a complete recluse, and when Mickey was born, she had no more beloved creature, and everything else took a back seat. You could say that's when Natalie was never seen. She never left their huge house, where she and her son had only lived in a couple of rooms. Even the servants couldn't figure out how to behave with her. Quiet, thoughtful, shy, never felt like a hostess. She and Mickey had plenty of room to walk around in the garden, which was walled off from the rest of the world by a high fence. There was a small children's slide, and Natalie would slide down it, holding the fur envelope with Mickey, who was already learning to laugh, to her chest. The artist appeared at the country house less and less often, but he came as attentive, as brilliant, as able to charm anyone. He brought gifts for Natalie and his son, asking if they needed anything else. What did they want? And more often in his conversations, the name of his wife, from whom he was not yet officially divorced, came up. When Nelka and I, Nelka is such a woman, don't put your finger in her mouth, Then Nelka wanted to, and I said they had no children. By summer, he suddenly became attentive and affectionate again, and once took them and Mickey to the zoo, and so well portrayed the monkeys right in front of their cage, jumped and whooped, not shy of the audience. Someone even filmed it on the phone, that the baby laughed and began to clap in tiny hands. This happened 2 days later. Mickey was asleep and Natalie was enjoying fiddling in the garden. She had her own big flower bed here. The artist laughed. The only thing his beloved asked him for was flowers, but not bouquets, but seeds, seedlings, saplings. And now everything that had been planted in spring was blooming and fragrant. Natalie, wearing rough gardening gloves, was working with a wicker rose that needed to be guided to the right path so that it would wrap beautifully around the carved metal arch. It seemed to her the gate was far away from the garden that a car had pulled up. She even called out to one of the guards, a 2-meter-tall monolithic nanny who appeared in the garden and strolled between Natalie and the house. Had someone arrived? Barry? The guard shook his head silently, and Natalie returned to her roses. She labored without lifting her head until she heard far away, but that sound was unmistakably Mickey's crying. What? She blurted out. How? It just couldn't be. Mickey was asleep in his room, in his crib, and there were 2 maids at home. They'd call if anything happened. It's happened more than once, but Mickey was crying somewhere out there at the gate. Natalie threw off her oversized gloves and ran, and almost immediately she was intercepted by a guard. Quiet, quiet. But there, screamed Natalie. They're taking Barry away, the guard said in a tone as if it would convince her that she was doing the right thing. The chief said he was going to have a baby. Natalie's only concern now was to break free, to get out of the hands that held her, to get away before it was too late, before she could catch up. But Nanny held her as easily as if she were a small child herself. He released her only when he heard the noise of the engine. Natalie fell to the ground and sobbed. She couldn't remember the days following Mickey's abduction. When she called the artist 5, 10, 30 times, the phone would ring a short beep. And then one of the maids, Catherine, came into her room. Yes, she was simply called Katya, although she was almost twice as old as her young mistress. Catherine sat down on the bed, embraced the frightened Natalie, and remained silent for a few minutes. Then she said, "He then called you to the zoo so that his wife could look at the boy. You probably didn't notice her. Nellie has no children of her own. So you took her own. They'll live together now." Natalie raised her red, swollen face. "But you can't do that," she cried so much she was hiccuping. Catherine's face was sorrowful and hard. "Of course you can. How many cases like this? And you can't do anything now. They won't let you into their city apartment. You can't prove anything in court. Just tell him that he has all the conditions to raise his son, and you? Maybe somewhere in the newspaper." Catherine shook her head. "With great pleasure in you now, and the newspapers will cling to you, and television. People are as hungry for such things as, pardon me, flies are for dung. But even there you won't prove anything. You'll only be thrown in the mud. They'll say you knew he was married. So why did you break up someone else's family? And he will turn out to be honest noble, that he did not give up his son, decided to bring up." Ekaterina's face remained the same rigid, and she never once called the artist by his name, saying only he. She seemed to know his value, and not just any price, but a human one. And he was exactly the kind of dung that flies would flock to. The only thing Natalie could do was to go to the house where the artist lived with his wife and her son and spend days there, hoping that Mickey would be taken outside someday. She'd sit on the bench, staring at their windows. She'd jump up when the front door opened. She'd leave when night fell, and no one would go out with the baby. A friend from the institute took her in at that time. In the early morning, Natalie would go to her post again. On the 4th day, a man as faceless as the guards at their country house came out of the house, tall, in an austere suit. He said, turning to Natalie, who had jumped up startled and was clutching her purse with Mickey's favorite toy, "You don't have to sit here. They're leaving now." "Where?" Natalie groaned. It was too much to put so much on a person. "They've gone to the seaside. But when they come back, you know you can't stay here. And if you start threatening, blackmailing, we'll deal with you quickly. That's what you should be afraid of." That day, her friend Anna sat by Natalie's side for a long time. "Understand, these assholes don't care that you gave birth, that you're a mother. There are many surrogates, and they don't ask for anything. You get the money and you're out. It's a long life anyway. She'll grow up, you'll see. Don't cry, it's impossible. I'll call an ambulance. Let them inject you with something. Where should you go now? Anna pondered. If your grandfather is dead, you have no one to go to. Your parents moved to the north 1,000 years ago. How long have they not written to you? Did you get your last letter in the 3rd grade? You want to live here with me for a while, or we'll find you an apartment. He should give you at least some money, that Henrik. It's hard to get a job now. While you find one, get a job. Natalie shook her head against her pillow. A few weeks later, Anna brought her a week's trip to the sea. Change the situation. Think about what you're going to do next. Or maybe, who knows, she was saving that last argument for when you meet them there. They told you they went to the resort. But of course, Natalie didn't meet them there. They were obviously somewhere nice. Now it was time to go back. She knew what she would do. She would go back to her and her grandfather's house, back to where she grew up. She had no one left but her friend Anka and her own walls. Let the wound heal a little, and then she'll decide what to do. It was unthinkable to leave her son to strangers, and she now considered Artis to be a complete stranger. In the last few days, she had come to the embankment in the morning, sat down on a bench in a shady corner of it, and thought. In that luxurious and fake world she did not fit in, now she needed to find the ground under her feet. She would go back to the village, unlock the old house, breathe its air. Maybe she attracted someone's attention, a young woman in dark glasses, sitting still and stern. She stood out against the background of those who strolled in idleness and relaxation. It was getting dark. Fishermen were gathering on the breakwater, and yachts with high masts were returning to the lagoon for the night. And fishermen's fishing rods were also long, and green lights were burning on them, and the sea always became scary at night. At the breakwater, the storms were boiling, the waves were crashing against the rocks, and the black, unsearchable desert of the sea stretched to the horizon. Then the moon would rise and spread a silvery path on the waves. But not afraid of this black sea, from stone to stone, jumping almost to the waves, almost to the fishing rods, local cats were hurrying. For some reason, all of them without tails, they were sitting on the rocks, impatiently shuffling their paws, extinguishing the instinct of hunters when the fish would glimmer in the air. Southern fireflies flew by, their lanterns burning with yellow and green sparks. On the right flashed a rusted iron ladder going up a hill. And there was a sign, private property, no trespassing, and at the top was a rusty fence. I couldn't help but run up carefully and quietly. Leslie peered through the gap. It looked like what used to be a campground. Dull wooden huts, waist-high grass. She could have climbed over the fence and explored the cabins, but not now. Leslie was in a hurry to find out what was at the end of the trail and get home early so she wouldn't get caught. A few minutes later, she saw on the other side of the trail, also in the bushes, a sunken iron tower, a water tower. There was a window and a rusty door. Leslie couldn't resist, stuck in, and hissed, falling into a small ditch. Her feet were scalded with nettles. There could be snakes in here, by the way, and she was unfamiliar with them. There at home, she knew perfectly well on what stone likes to crawl to warm up viper and where you can meet a hedgehog. But curiosity won out, so she reached the tower and looked inside. It wasn't bad that it was dark inside, it was bad that it was empty. Only sparse weeds poked through the floor. Leslie jumped to the ground, shook off her palms, and climbed back out onto the path. What was farther down was much more interesting. There was a stone bridge across the ravine. It was wide, and a car could drive over it. It looked like it had been repaired not too long ago, but the stones on the sides of the bridge were ancient, uneven, covered with moss. And in general, it was so nice here. The green labyrinth of the forest hid the sun. The outstretched arms seemed emerald, and it was clear that the heat would not be here even in the intense heat. Leslie immediately composed that this bridge existed in time immemorial, and over it rode riders on mighty horses and ladies in carriages. And if you put your hand to these ancient stones, they remembered them, of course. And you can hear the clatter of hooves, voices. She took her hand away and nimbly climbed up the nearest hillside, where she imagined something. She froze in utter delight. There was another plaque, and on it was an inscription, all in honor, archaeological monument, ruins of an ancient fortress, protected by the state. It was obvious that the state had not protected anything for a long time. There were a few plastic bottles and other trash, but above them, between the roots of a pine tree, another man would have wondered what kind of fortress we were talking about. But Leslie saw at once, These wild stones were so fitted together that they formed a piece of wall, no doubt. So this place, his soundless voice told her the truth. The ancients had lived here, and the place is good from afar to see the enemy or friend. And if there was an enemy behind this wall, people defended themselves from him. And further away, Leslie almost gasped. There was a house. Behind the house was another campground. Again, boarded up houses, a few cars. But the house, it was old, white, abandoned. She realized it at once. Abandonment was obvious. The windows boarded up, and some were just black holes, collapsed plaster. But the house itself told her about the antiquity. It did not have the pompous scale of an unfinished new building. A restrained beauty, noble, with dignity. It was like, let some old mark be, my lord. Leslie cast a quick glance toward the campground. At this early hour, none of the people were still in sight. Adults hate it terribly when children get into old houses. Adults think that the ceiling, the walls, and all the stairs will collapse on the children there at once. Crouching down, Leslie took short strides to the side of the house that overlooked the woods. One of the windows was boarded up only halfway. Leslie grabbed the edge of the board, pulled herself up, and slid through the window. It was a hard and clumsy jump to the floor. The gap was too narrow. Leslie looked around. It was a small corner room. Light once, 2 large windows. Leslie imagined at once what it would have been like to live here. Listening to the sound of rain, playing the piano, pensively thumbing through notes, reading novels, sitting in an armchair, listening to the sound of horseshoes clattering like gunshots, inhaling the smell of wet grass and lilacs. The walls were covered with exposed shingles, and on the floor were several empty 5-liter bottles of Rodnick water. Leslie took a step further and froze on the threshold, holding onto the door jambs. In the hallway, the devastation was even greater. A collapsed staircase. There was no way to climb to the second floor. The ceiling, still white, seemed as high as a temple. Piles of garbage, some old mattresses, bags. Someone must have used the house as a dumping ground. The house stood defenseless and still beautiful. And there was a story you wanted to tell. Oh, how Leslie would have stayed here. How she would have studied the mysteries of the house, looked at the marks on the wallpaper, at the chandelier from which hung the only crystal, listened to what the house wanted to tell her. But she couldn't. She went out the same way, and deciding to look there for the last time, where something glittered between the lilac bushes, for 5 minutes only. She ran down the hill on which the house stood and clasped her hands on her chest, as if she had received a royal gift, as if the morning had filled her head with miracles, when she could not believe that this wealth was royal, paradisiacal for you, and only for you. Before her lay a small lake, water the color of dark amber and yellow lilies. At first she saw only that, and it was all hers now. And the brown velvety reeds, and all the frogs and frogs that jumped into the water from under her feet, and that little island in the middle of the lake, where there was a birch and a stone, and where Leslie would also be someday. She would learn every waterhole here, every lily lying on the water, every pebble she would know by name, give names to the water bugs. She'd come home drunk on these wonders. She'd even sway. How much she had to tell the man who lay motionless and knew none of it. Did you say lake? A lake, yes. Leslie clenched her hands on her breast again, and the water is so dark that there may be no bottom at all. You know the city of Kitej that went underwater? It was flooded with bell ringing. The ringing ran like silver streams and mesmerized the city, and it hid in this silver. And there's something here, I know it. Can mermaids live there? In the lake? If they live there, then on even, they'll come to the ground to weave braids. We can see. When will you get up? Me? Cardo's eyebrows shifted to the bridge of his nose. He was so perplexed by this question, as if Leslie had asked him when he could fly out the window. You know what, Leslie thought quickly, you can get there on horseback. There are horses around here, aren't there? We have one where we live. The shepherd has 2. Harvey and I can ride really, and the horse will go down to the water, and you'll see everything. From her point of view, it was impossible to waste time and lie down and just go on with life. If you can't walk with your legs now, you've got to find something to replace them. Get 4 horse legs instead of your own 2. And also, said Leslie, not so boldly, I saw in your garage. There's a boat and some hunting rifles. You're not going hunting, are you? How do I tell her, this girl? He's killed people before, but he'd never been hunting in his life. Never happened, and he never wanted to try. Raise a hand on someone weaker, killed just for the thrill of it. Just don't go swimming out there alone, he asked. Sometime later, when I have a horse. Leslie nodded fervently. The rest of the day went well for them. Grandmother had despaired of taking Leslie to their room, or at least to the garden. And assured after Carlos' words that the girl was not a nuisance, she did not separate them any further. And Leslie scrutinized the pills Carlos was taking. The pain that showed on his face didn't escape her, and the way he reached for the vial afterward. "Does it help?" she asked. And he almost laughed in spite of the pain the way she asked it, with the intimation of a little old lady. And then, as the medicine began to take effect, he fell asleep for a while. When he woke up, Leslie was sitting beside him, whittling her leg and sticking out her tongue a little, weaving a wreath of dandelions. There were lots of dandelions, and the wreath was long and long. "You know," he said, "horses ever after a nap. In Indonesia they hang such wreaths of flowers around their necks. In India too. On festivals, when I was there." And if before she had seemed an old woman to him, now she turned to him and her eyes opened childishly. "Where?" She almost breathed it out. If the little lake was a marvel to her, he, who had been in the land of living elephants. He told her until dinner, and already her grandmother was dragging her almost by the hand, but she did not want to leave. And noticing his lips contorted with pain, she twisted out from under her grandmother's arm and rushed to the table. Pills. The pills must be given quickly. She found her last treasure of the day in her new home, or rather in the garden. Just as in the morning, when she had to walk around these endless possessions, find every flower with a keen eye and say hello to it, nod to a robin perched on a branch, and stick her nose into the velvety coolness of a blossoming rose, so in the evening she had to say goodbye to everyone here for the night. A discovery awaited her when she first looked behind the arbor braided with wild grapes. In the evening shadows it seemed like a cave in which there was little chance of anyone hiding, and Leslie went fearfully around it. And then she saw a semicircular stone barrier, on which it would be so comfortable to sit, and in front of the real cave, also made of stone. It was up to Leslie's shoulders. There was wood in the cave, and there was a hole in the ceiling. "It's for fire. You can make a fire here. Keep the wood nearby and the matches in a nook, so that the rain wouldn't soak them." Leslie knew how to start a fire with the first match. Now she sat down, noticing at once on which side the fire would start faster. Her hands were chilled now, and she looked forward to sitting by the living fire, which breathed in her face, warming her. It wrapped her for a few moments in a light cloak of smoke, and then it was gone, only the air swayed lightly over the flames. She sat on one of the logs stolen from the fire and looked into the fire, and her gaze was still now. She knew it had happened so many times before. Everything around her was about to stir, just as the air above the fire had done, and then it would melt, recede, and be replaced by something else. She was in that old house again, and it was the same quiet evening hour as here. But instead of the junk and squalor, the dirt floor, and the blue-painted walls, she saw now the coziness of a small room. A black piano with carvings and a candlestick on the lid. A porcelain boy, frozen in a run, with a torch in his hand. However, the candle, though there was a candle, was not burning. The lamp on the desk, on the other hand, was lit. With her back to Leslie, a girl was sitting at the desk. Her face Leslie could not see. Her dark blonde hair was braided into a long, thick braid. A white knitted shawl with long tassels was thrown over her shoulders. The girl was writing something. The feeling of presence was so complete that Leslie could hear the girl's breathing. At times it stopped. Then the girl took a breath and began to write again on sheets of postal paper. And there was another person in the room Leslie did not immediately notice. In the darkest corner of the room sat motionless and staring at her, the same girl whom she had seen so often, almost always in those moments when the unknown was revealed to her. The girl was always dressed in the same way, a white starched dress and a summer hat. The girl's hair was loose, and her bangs fell on her forehead. Usually her face had a feigned angry expression, but it was certain that, in spite of her frowning eyebrows, she was about to laugh herself, or to say something that would make everyone laugh. Now her face was unpretendingly stern. She raised her hand and pointed to a corner of the opposite wall. There was an icon hanging there. Leslie couldn't see it in detail from here. A small icon in a gilded casket of the Virgin Mary with the child in her arms. Leslie took her eyes off the icon and looked at the girl again. She nodded. Then she put her hand on her breast, and Leslie could see something curled between her fingers. "Where do I have you?" A voice from this world called out to Leslie. As she tried to hold on, She felt as if she were being torn out of a dream that promised infinitely more, a dream that she would never dream again. It showed a young man, full length, wearing a military uniform, a sword at his belt. His hair was slicked back and his eyes were dark and squinted. Was it the world or just her? "What are you doing here?" Grandmother's footsteps were both heavy and soft, hurried, but Leslie had time to look up. "Who gave you permission?" "We don't need a fire in here, do we?" "Well, this was built for fire to live in. It's a house for fire," Leslie explained. Barbara sank down beside her on the stone bench. "Well, it's none of our business. It's only for the owners." "But we live here now," Leslie said, urging her on. She reclined her head, and then, thinking it would be more comfortable, she lay down on the long bench. "Look at the stars," she said. The peaceful, even light was not threatening, but warm and soothing, and Barbara looked up at the sky too. "You see, when the month is young, it doesn't obscure the stars. Do you have some silver money in your pocket to show him?" Grandmother unobtrusively but firmly believed in omens. According to one of them, a newborn month should be shown a coin. The month would grow, and so would the silver in your pocket. "Mom forgets there's a sky," Leslie said sadly. "That time she took me to her house, I asked her, 'Mom, can I sleep on the lobby?' She's got a little couch out there that I can just fit on. And there are flowers in boxes. Matiola smells at night. My mom didn't want to let me go in there at first. She said, 'You'll freeze.' But I told her, 'Mom, don't worry, I won't get sick.' So she allowed it, but she brought me the thickest blanket, a cotton one. And at night she came to me and asked me, 'Aren't you cold?' And I said, 'Mom, sit with me and look at the sky.' And there were so many stars, the sky was so fabulous. It wasn't. It was solemn. We sit, we look, we are silent. And then Mom says, 'Leslie,' and I'm the first for a long time to look at the sky. I don't remember it at all. Just the Big Dipper," I said, "and the moon." "There was a moon then." Mom laughs. "And the moon." I showed her later, like you taught me, the Polaris and the constellation Orion. Mom said, "Leslie, you gotta remember, you can't live with your nose in the ground like I do. And then you'll look up and you'll be so sorry that your life is gone, and you didn't even notice the stars." Barbara covered Naskia's hand with her palm, the soft silk of her hair. Even her hair was still childish, like a puppy's fur. "Do you miss your mom?" Leslie was quiet for a moment, a few seconds, then shook her head. "No, I know she'll be miserable here. She'll be the one who'll miss her again, like she did then, the city. She won't even want to look at the sky here, even though we have so much of it." She took a deep breath, and then, "Look, is that an airplane or a satellite? There, over there." Barbara squinted. "Where?" "It's an airplane, the lights." "Carlos told me he doesn't like airplanes. He likes to walk everywhere with his feet." I said it and stammered. "He can hardly walk anymore." But that's not what Grandma heard. "What? Carlos who?" "He's how many years older than you? How can you have a grown man? You can only call him Carlos, like the teachers at school." "Grandma, but you can see for yourself that he's like me. He's not a grown-up, he's like a boy. His eyes aren't even stern." "No, it's impossible," said Grandma, who herself had seen in her grown-up pupils the same old boys and girls. And Leslie went on, realizing that her grandmother was objecting to her for appearance, but in fact she was thinking like herself. "He has different stones, Grandmother, he showed me. He says they're better than pictures. If you want to remember where you were, you squeeze a stone in your hand, close your eyes, and it's like you're standing in the same place again. And the most beautiful stone is from the north. He found it near the city. On one side it's ordinary gray, but on the other side you turn it over and it's like a mirror, smooth and lilac. No, it's like a frozen lake with lilac water. I hope you didn't ask for anything?" "No, Grandma, I know." Leslie knew that if a person looks at a thing that you have or takes it in his hands, and his eyes become happy, just because it is there, exists, and it does not matter whose it is, then this thing should be given away at once, because it and its real owner have finally met. And that lilac, icy stone was found, discovered by another person, and it wasn't hers at all. The carved metal lanterns here and there lit up by themselves, and the shadows thickened even more. Grandmother even shuddered. "Put out your fire so there's not a charcoal left." Leslie squatted down in front of the fire. "Grandma, you'll still be coming over to see him at night, won't you? See if he's in pain, give him some pills. And if you don't know what kind, call me. I got it memorized.